Welcome to a spring where water decides who lives. Rattlesnake Springs, 1880. A place where the desert hums like a hot wire and a single shimmer can redraw the day. August 6th, 1880. Rattlesnake Springs, New Mexico. The water glints like a coin no one can quite afford. A young trooper of the 10th Cavalry slides a thumb along the trapdoor breech click. A clean metallic syllable then lets the carbine settle against his shoulder as if the wood itself could drink. Heat trembles above the mesquite. A horse snorts the sound swallowed by light. Far off, something moves not enough to name, enough to matter. Before we begin, drop a comment with where you're watching from and the exact minute you're listening. Tell us what you feel in this heat, the thirst, the breath, the hush before a shot, and which detail pulls you in. The letter in a pocket, the mirage at the rim, the circle around a spring. Your notes become part of the record, a ledger of witnesses across time. They have ridden to the place where maps narrow to thirst. Hold the spring, they were told, and everything that wants to live will have to answer you. Lose it, and you chase mirage until your horse forgets its own name. The officer's hand cuts a shallow arc, hold the left watch. The seep breathe through your teeth, and the line settles into that disciplined, quiet soldiers carry like a second canteen. Across the flats, a flicker. Warm Springs Apache riders slipping through glare the way fish slip a net. Victorio is out there, not a rumor now. But the kind of presence the land respects, lean exacta mind that reads stone as if it were a ledger. The trooper touches a letter in his pocket, unsent, folded along the same curve the spring makes where it meets rock. He thinks about how newspapers file courage under other men's headlines. How colored troops becomes a number with names sanded off. How the word forgotten tastes like dust and yet sharpens a man the way grit sharpens a blade. He measures the ground in breaths. 10 to the rim, 20 back to the seep, 100 to where the mirage begins to lie convincingly. The first shot does not shout the heat-eats sound, but it slices the day neatly into before and after. Dust lifts. Leather creaks. A voice maybe his own says steady, steady, and the carbine answers with the calm grammar of a practiced trigger. The spring keeps its small, patient music. The riders test faint, unravel, reform, a geometry of survival colliding with a geometry of denial. And here in the narrow kingdom of water, the 10th Cavalry make a circle that will not break men visible and somehow unseen, requiring history to come closer, stand in the light and say their name. Out loud. The weeks before August 6, 1880. Unspool like a sun-bleached ribbon, frayed at the edges, marked by hoof prints, telegraph clicks, and the brittle arithmetic of canteens. The country is basin and range-long tables of stone and scrub thrown against sudden walls of mountain. And in every hollow that dares to hold a green thought, there is the rumor of water. New Mexico territory is not quiet. It breathes in thermal gusts and exhales mirage. To the west, canyons swallow sound. To the east, the plains fall away until a rider can feel distance as a pressure behind the eyes. And in the middle of this long sentence of land, there is a comma shaped like a spring. Rattlesnake Springs, a pause where life catches its breath before the next clause of motion. The 10th Cavalry have learned to read the land the way accountants read columns methodically, without sentiment, insisting that each line add up. They are men of routine, black soldiers in blue wool, names worn smooth by hard posts and harder expectations, who wake before light to curry horses, to check hooves, to measure grain by the handful and water by the mouthful. They oil the trapdoor breech as if it were a prayer. They fold letters along seams that fit the pocket of a fatigue blouse. They joke when jokes are cheap, and save silence for the hours after saddle when breath must carry two duties at once. Newspapers will call them colored troops, will compress experience to a category. But out here, category is a luxury. Out here they are the geometry of persistence. the habit of holding. The weight the spring must balance if it is to remain a spring. Victorio's people, the Chihenne Warm Springs Apache, move under a different grammar. Theirs is the grammar of motion, of kinship set against lines, drawn elsewhere by men who never smelled this dust or counted this water. Reservations have been both promise and trap. Agencies the hinges that creak then break. Orders fall like hail, hard, brief, and cold, and then melt into nothing by dawn. Victorio refuses the dull predictability of a pen. He rides for the logic of a band that will not be edited out of its own story. He rides for a hill with water enough for one more dawn, then another and another. And when he must fight it, is a fight arranged the way a stream arranges the stones that resist it patient. Curved, precise. Between these grammars, the habit of holding and the refusal to be held the summer has ranged. Telegraph poles drop their thin syllables down the line sightings. Raids, tracks lost in stone, horses jaded, rations thinned. Officers' pencil orders with a lawyer's caution and a gambler's hunch. Scouts sketch the land in words that only half belong to English. The 10th rides south, then west, then north, then back again. The saddle becomes a kind of hourglass, the sand not falling but grinding. And in every plan that hopes to corner speed, there is always the clause that begins, if we deny water. Rattlesnake Springs is not a well with walls. It is a seep that gathers where the ground remembers rain. A low green whisper against the flat brown fact. Mesquite stubble. Ocotillo ribs. A lip of rock darkened by the same gesture repeated for centuries, water touching stone, and letting the stone tell the tale. You can smell it before you can see it, not sweetness, but relief. A place where horses stop bracing their necks against the unknown and begin to listen. A place that once found must be guarded because once found, it will be needed by everyone. At dusk, the 10th lay out their small city of discipline. Pickets where the ground suggests a shadow might be mistaken for a path. Ammunition stacked where hands can find it by memory. Grain sacks cinched beneath tarps pretending to be shade. A ledger line of sentry posts ticks off the night. Men eat without theater, hard bread softened, jerked beef chewed to thought, and drink in small exact sips. Conversation becomes a low braid of old stories and new distances. Someone mentions Fort Davis. Another, a letter from a cousin at Fort Concho. A third swears he will see the ocean someday and let the water make a sound that isn't thirst. Laughter arrives, cracks, fades. Then a quiet that isn't fear, just the desert taking back its share. We step back the way a camera lifts, as if admitted to a higher seat, and the theater expands. To the south, Chihuahua waits behind a border that coyotes respect more than men. To the north, the Sacramento Mountains hold their dark. To the east, the Pecos dreams of cattle railheads and newsprint. To the west, land where the word trail means only direction. The Army color codes its intentions. Departments, sub-districts, posts that live and die on requisition slips, but the land is unimpressed by paper. It answers only to seasons and to whether a spring is giving or pretending. Messages cross space at the speed of horse or wire, both can fail. Policy arrives like weather, sometimes in storm, sometimes as a drift you don't notice until your boots are full. The 10th carry not only weapons, but hours paid into the account of a commander's plan. Each horse stands upon a triangle of care-feed water shoes. Remove 1 point, and speed becomes a rumor. Remove 2, and speed becomes a story men tell about yesterday. The farrier's hammer rings like a metronome. The saddler's needle moves as if stitching skin back onto the day. Corporals walk the line and talk the animals calm, because the desert, when it does not have your name, will try to take your horses instead. Salt crusts on collars. Sweat dries into maps the body draws for itself, chalky rivers along ribs and over shoulders. Men learn the difficult art of sleeping near water without dreaming of it too hard, and always the arithmetic of access. A spring is never simply water, it is time. Control the spring, and you buy hours for your side. Sell fatigue to your opponent. Deny it, and a fast rider becomes the length of a tongue. Give it, and a hungry band grows teeth again. The officers of the 10th, some young enough to mistake careful for timid, some old enough to know the cost of bravado, choose the circle. They put men where the land itself would have placed them if the land wore chevrons. They allow the spring to appear unguarded, the way a spider web appears abandoned, only from a distance, only to the inattentive. Victorio watches with the eyes of a man who has outlived the patience of paper. He knows that battles are never only where bullets are fired. They begin first in wells and bellies, in mares heavy with the arithmetic of a hard season, in children's feet gone raw from miles no one promised. He will test because testing is honest, and he will read the reply from the spring itself. He will not throw lives at a circle only because it is a circle. He will move the way wind chooses the grass that can afford to bend. Night lays its cool hand over the basin. Coyotes write margin notes nobody will read aloud. The sentries become punctuation, small upright marks against a horizontal sentence. Somewhere a lantern shaded lifts a cone of gold that chooses a map and leaves a face in darkness. A sergeant murmurs the watchbill voice clipped, almost tender, and men take their turns inside the long hour. The trooper, the one with the unsent letter and the folded resolve, leans on a saddle-turned pillow. Imagines how a story might be told without the parts that hurt to say. He thinks of the phrase, battle fought by the forgotten, tries it on like a jacket too big in some places, too tight in others, and then sleeps before deciding whether the phrase is a truth or a dare. At dawn, the spring is silver. Birds better logisticians than men arrive first and leave in rational order. Horses nose the air with that shy greed that suggests memory. Men stretch into themselves, stepping back into a suit that stiffened overnight. The officer draws a small plan in dust lines. Arcs. A dot meaning a man will lie here and see more than he has seen, and the plan looks modest, almost embarrassed, as if aware of how often plans pretend to be the future. Hold the water, he says not loudly, the words already part of the ground they stand on. Beyond the green light, gains temperature, then pressure. Figures hover at the edge of certainty. Are they riders, brush, or the mirage rehearsing its tricks? A scout whose shadow is longer than his name gestures with 2 fingers, wait. Then maybe. The 10th learn the particular stillness of men about to spend their day carefully. They find the breathing that makes the carbine steady, not heavy. They measure distance in the slow currency of we can get there and back. And in the quiet before the first definite choice, the spring speaks in its small voice, a notice served on everyone equally, I will make you decide. We widen again one last time to set the stakes. This is not only a contest between men with different flags. It is a referendum on which map gets to be called real. It is the Army's wager that geometry and ration can silence speed and improvisation. It is Victorio's wager that a band made of blood and habit can outlast the paper idea of order. It is the 10th Cavalry's wager that if they do their work with an exactness that looks like humility, the desert might finally confess what it knows. That courage is sometimes quiet, and that quiet can be louder than any headline when the right ear is listening. The sun climbs relentless, efficient, merciless. The day thins into a bright wire. Rattlesnake Springs narrows to its roll. Horses edge forward in thoughts rather than steps. The line exhales into its circle. The air begins its low electric hum. Somewhere, a canteen cap clicks against tin, a small bright note in a key the basin understands. and the story which has been pacing the lip of the moment steps forward, into contact, into test, into the long, careful sentence of a battle that will decide for a little while at least which grammar the land will speak. The record begins in ink, not heat. It begins in lines that do not sweat, in telegraph ticks that never thirst. On or about August 6, 1880, Rattlesnake Springs, New Mexico Territory. Elements of the 10th U.S. Cavalry, operating under orders to deny water to Victorio's band, established positions around the Seep and engaged in repeated skirmishes throughout the day. That is the sentence the adjutant prefers. Spare exact a spine of nouns and dates. Yet, even on paper, a faint ripple moves beneath the words. The ripple of water held, water measured, water made into strategy. Dispatches from the field describe dispositions, crisply pickets forward along the scrub edge, skirmishers echeloned to refuse a flank. A reserve held tight where the ground lifts and the wind goes thin. Ammunition was checked, canteens rationed by mouthfuls, horses kept turned away from the scent. Somewhere behind the prose, a sergeant's hand drew a pencil circle around the spring and wrote the simplest verb the desert knows hold. The intent to turn speed into hunger, to turn hunger into distance, to make distance do what bullets alone cannot. Across from these entries in a different hand, a quartermaster's figures march in dull formation. Carbine rounds issued, forage distributed, shoeing nails accounted for. The numbers are not dramatic, they are faithful. Men fight with drama. Armies survive by faithful numbers. The 10th's faith in this theater was water discipline, a habit weathered smooth by months of riding after a leader who turned geography into rhythm. Deny the spring, and the rhythm stutters. Do it long enough, and the song ends. Now a pause, an echo. Folklore does not begin with on or about. It begins with a rattle nobody can place. A ranch hand, decades later, tells a WPA interviewer that his father would not camp within sight of the Seep. Not that it was haunted, he says, just attended. The word hangs there, an old lantern in a doorway. Attended by what? By whom? He cannot quite say. On certain nights, he insists the waterline kept a quiet more careful than silence, as if it were being kept, in both senses of the word. Return to the ledger. Scouts reported movement at first light, low silhouettes tasting the line, then thin dust rising where hooves gathered and stopped. Test shots, then longer cracks, then a lull, as if the day itself considered other options. The reports praise steadiness. They praise the way the line did not chase mirage. They praise the decision not to spend men to prove that men could be spent. The logic is unromantic and correct. Endure the tests, deny the water, wait for hunger to take leadership's place beside your enemy. And yet, in the margins, someone has noted the heat, not the temperature, the behavior of it. Sound eaten, one phrase reads. Orders must be seen, not heard. The desert is editing the command voice, even as the command seeks to edit the day. In the other register, the one with breath, a low story grows. A cook long retired tells his grandchildren that the spring taught men to whisper. You could hear the water speaking to itself, he says, and you didn't want to interrupt. They laugh. But later they listen differently to the wind in the rain barrel. In another town across another decade, an older woman sings a line that nobody recognizes, but everyone understands: drink last. So the horses can tell you if the day is true. The verse settles into the bottom of the song like silt too fine to sift out, too present to ignore. Fact the probes. From mid-morning to early afternoon, riders appeared in thin filaments, seeking seam and overlook. The 10th answered with measured fire, never so much as to forget the ration in the cartridge box, never so little as to invite a mistake. The idea of the fight, more than the edges of it, is clear in prose: a circle around a gleam, a band refusing a pen, both sides asking the same question with different accents. Is there enough here for us to survive? The returns: record no quick resolution, no cavalry charge worthy of a lithograph. They record heat-paced denial, a sort of open-air siege whose walls are made of patience. The mouth-to-mouth story, the one without officers, works differently. There is a trooper with a letter in his pocket, a detail that keeps its truth by refusing to identify itself too closely. He is seen kneeling at a rock lip, citing carefully, breathing the way a man breathes, when he wants his hands to be smarter than his thoughts. He looks in the telling like concentration made into a person. Children listening to the tale remember the shape of his shadow better than his face. They remember that he never drank first. They remember that someone said his name once, and that it sounded like a bell rung under a blanket. Later, they will disagree on the name, but they will not disagree on the way he held water with the calm a cup pretends to have. Back to paper where memory cannot smudge as easily. A note on terrain, low rock shelves for partial cover. Mesquite too sparse to hide men, just enough to suggest motion. The seep's course shallow but sufficient to darken stone. Effective ranges were variable mirage and glare complicating sight. Enemy charges resolved into spirals. At range, one officer writes a spare description of the way momentum died when thirst did not agree to escort it. Another line, almost charitable, observes, "Their decision to test without committing fully shows prudence under constraint." Even in conflict, men who understand the country will sometimes salute one another without moving their hands. And still in the shadow of the ledger, the other layer persists. Ghost stories are not interested in guilt or innocence. They are interested in places that do not forget. A border town mechanic, Grease, in the lines of his fingerprints, tells a visitor in the 1930s that he leaves a cup near the spring when he hunts jackrabbits. Not for me, he shrugs for the morning. Asked what he means, he says only, "The morning comes better if you've made room for it." He does not say soldiers. He does not say Apache. He says morning, and pours something like respect onto the ground where names used to clash. Fact, the pattern hardens after noon. The first excitement bleeds into a wary cadence. On the far ridge forms linger and then lengthen vectors pointing away rather than toward. The 10th do not pursue, not in the way a painting might hope. They keep the circle because the circle is the order. Their victory, such as it is, will be measured in someone else's miles tomorrow. Supply counts are updated. A few horses are flagged to be walked and watered slow lest they founder. The spring is briefly allowed to be its own sound, and men lean against the day like men leaning into a wind that has finally agreed to let them pass. Folklore does not allow endings. It hoards echoes. A ranch school teacher, dry voice, careful hands, writes in a local newsletter that she will not take her students to the spring until they learn to stand still. "I do not want to raise a generation that cannot listen," she writes. Then adds, almost as if embarrassed by the poet in her bones, "The place is not a story, it is a listener." She receives no letters in reply. She does not expect any. She knows that some places answer only if you keep your mouth closed long enough to notice. Record scouts report shadowing movement into the evening. "Enemy likely to seek water elsewhere," says one line. Recommend detachments to monitor alternate sources. The map attached to the dispatch circles 3 other seeps with a pencil so light that a century later the circles are nearly invisible. Invisible, and still there. The logistics officer notes that the men of the 10th took their ration late. He writes it as if he were writing weather. He does not mention the way the first sip felt in a throat gone disciplined. He leaves that for the part of history that resides in skin. Whisper the trooper with the letter. No one agrees if he ever sent it. One version insists it was found years later among papers cleaned from a trunk in a boarding house near a railhead. Another says it never existed, that the letter is only a character the story needed in order to speak about concentration, patience, and respect without having to argue. Both can be true in the way desert truths are true. A form and intent, a waterline of meaning that refuses to dry up just because someone cannot produce a stamp. Fact and folklore, touch step apart, touch again. Here is a line from a late summary. Control of Rattlesnake Springs deprived Victorio's band of necessary water and compelled their movement away from the contested area. Here is the sentence's echo, not written, but breathed. The spring chose keepers for a day, and in return, they kept its name from thinning. The first sentence lives in archives. The second lives in the space between a hat brim and a man's eyes. When he squints at light, he has not earned, but must endure. Pull the camera back, and the two layers braid. The ledger wants facts in columns, dates, units, rounds, expended casualties, if known. The campfire wants a cadence, a place, a decision, a respect for what cannot be reduced without damage. In the braid, something becomes visible, a discipline that does not announce itself, and a desert that does not forgive confusion between speed and wisdom. The 10th in the official story executed a denial mission with steadiness. In the unofficial one, they learned to hold still in a way that let the land admit them, if only for a day, into its way of speaking. And so the voiceover lets the two tones alternate like steps on hot rock. Fact, the positions were sound, the restraint exemplary, the outcome strategically useful. Folklore. The water was quieter when they stood there. Later, people brought cups. Fact. Victorio withdrew to seek another breath for his band, and the campaign's clock ticked on toward its hard winter. Folklore. The spring remembers the ones who did not drink first. Fact. The 10th's name seldom made the paper's first page. Folklore. The spring learned their names so well that even mirage will not mispronounce them. The day lowers itself toward evening. The adjutant's pen dries. The quartermaster's numbers are put to bed. A horse breathes a long, convincing sigh, the kind that resets a body. Someone laughs, carefully. Someone else stares through the small blue of water, as if trying to read tomorrow in it. The trooper, letter or no letter, touches his pocket because people sometimes need to feel the seam of something held together. Offstage, in a future crowded with radios and paved roads, a child will ask why the place is called Rattlesnake, and an old man will answer, because the land has ways of warning you that are not meant to scare you, only to make you honest. He will not mention soldiers or Apache. He will pick up his cup and show the child how to pour without spilling and how to wait before drinking so that anyone arriving late can still be welcomed by the sound of water. We end this part of the telling where the paper and the whisper agree at the water's edge, in the softness before dark, with the circle still around the spring and the map newly tilted by a day of denial. The facts stand grounded, numbered, signed. The folklore breathes, careful, respectful, unfinished. Between them, the spring continues a small, patient word the land keeps repeating, until someone listens closely enough to hear that it is not only a word, it is a name being said properly. At last, morning ripens into glare, and the basin begins to test itself. Not with a charge, not yet, but with the kind of pressure that arrives like a question asked 3 times in 3 different voices. The spring holds its small syllable of silver. The 10th hold their circle. Somewhere to the west, a dust thread trembles, then smooths, as if a hand had brushed it flat. The first incident announces itself without fanfare, a thin seam of motion where scrub thickens just enough to make certainty expensive. A scout older than his horse, younger than his eyes, lifts 2 fingers. Wait. Then yes. Riders appear in broken rhythm, cut by mesquite, stitched by glare. They do not come straight. They come in the grammar of the land, a clause, a comma, an unfinished thought. Hold the officer's hand says, and the line obeys with that quiet particular to soldiers who have practiced the art of not moving. The trooper with the letter feels his breath make the carbine steadier, not heavier, and finds the small notch of shadow that will keep his sight from swimming. Across the flats a rider edges, then vanishes. Another replaces him slightly nearer, then farther, then gone. The first shots from the 10th are not declarations, they are reminders. Range, mirage, patience. A figure lurches, corrects lurches again, then decides the spring is farther than thirst had promised. The probe becomes a curve, the curve becomes dust, and the line exhales but only half an inch. The second incident wears smoke. Not much enough to suggest brush fire or kitchen fire or a careless wind enough to turn the light into an argument. A low curtain rolls out along the left, where the ground falls away in a shallow bowl. Through it forms slide like thoughts half chosen. Careful, the sergeant breathes, and the word reaches only the men who need it. The 10th answer, not with volley, but with metronome, a crack, then silence measured in heartbeats, then another crack. Bullets fold smoke into smaller questions. Smoke answers by being smoke. In the haze, someone hears hoofbeats close, then far, or maybe it is his own pulse learning a new song. The temptation always is to chase the echo. The discipline now is to let the echo chase itself into a wall. When the wind shifts just enough to humble the trick, the bowl empties of certainty. A hat appears on a stick. Nobody fires at the hat. Somewhere behind it, a rider grins because his hat has made him another hour richer. The grin will go hungry later, but later has not arrived yet. Third incident sharper. A splinter party finds a seam between pickets where the ground's grammar says perhaps 3, no 4. Silhouettes flow through the gap and slope toward the seep with that terrible, beautiful speed of men who believe they are almost safe. The trooper moves without instruction. His training is a quiet handshake with time and meets them at a lip of darker stone. Sight. Breathe. Press the carbine speaks the calm grammar he has learned. The first rider pitches not theatrical, just wrong. The others flatten, then widen, then pour themselves back toward the seam that had briefly agreed to be a door. Left, an urgent whisper, not quite a shout, moves down the 10th's line, and men bend the circle, the way glass bends, light not breaking, only adjusting. The spring is not touched. The lip glistens. A horse riderless now noses the water with a tenderness that makes someone look away. Later, they will catch it gently, if it lets them, and walk it slow. So the body does not forget how to survive a kindness. Fourth incident signals argue. Heat eats distance. Distance eats meaning. On the far right, a set of hand signs, correct in shape, wrong in timing, makes a corporal see a gap where none exists. He shifts 2 men 3 paces too far, and the circle is no longer a circle. The desert notices flaws, the way a hawk notices mice. A flicker of movement becomes intent, and intent becomes velocity. Back, hold the rim. The officer's hand writes on the air, and the corporal reads it with shame, quick as a bruise. The gap restitches itself in 6 heartbeats. It feels like 6 minutes, and the rush breaks, as if against a glass that only men inside can see. Later, the corporal will ask to take the last watch, and no one will say why they let him. For now, the spring remains a word the enemy cannot pronounce without paying. Fifth incident, the kind that seems small until it isn't. A farrier kneeling to fix a loose shoe before the horse can turn lameness into a sentence, looks up at the wrong moment, and catches a glint sun on metal, a wick of intent. The farrier is not a skirmisher, but he is a soldier. He drops the hoof rolls to his side and makes himself part of a rock that just learned a new shape. The shot misses the place his head had been by the length of a named regret. 2 carbines answer from the skirmish line, not angry, exact, and the glint disappears. The horse stamps, confused, then calm. A nail lies in the dust like a tiny piece of tomorrow. The farrier pockets it because tomorrow will still need shoes and returns to a hoof that forgives him in the only language a hoof has. Sixth incident, a near miracle of restraint. A lone rider stripped for speed darts out from a shallow draw and makes for the water at a diagonal that tempts even the careful. He is close enough that the spring's reflection stutters across his horse's chest, close enough that his face becomes a face, not a figure. The line feels the urge to rise and meet him with the theater that battle paintings adore. But the officer's hand, that quiet metronome, cuts down, and the 10th hold to low fire. 2 shots, almost too patient, walk across the dust, in front of the horse like a boundary drawn by a firm, kind teacher. The rider checks shifts, gambles, and learns that the 3rd shot is not kind. He wheels not wounded, but wiser, and vanishes into a fold of land that looks as if it had been sown for this exact exit. Between incidents, thirst becomes a character. Canteens turn into metronomes. The day's rhythm is measured by how often a man allows himself the sound of a cap against tin. Sip, don't drink, the sergeant says, not because he loves rules, because he has learned that tomorrow pays for today's relief and interest. The horses watch the men the way children watch parents who won't explain supper yet. Tongues memorize salt. Sweat writes maps on shirts and disappears, leaving only the rumor of rivers. 7th incident, the long feint. From the west, dust builds in a disciplined line too neat for chance. It looks like a promise. The line shifts weight, not movement, intention. And then from the south, a quieter thread, the real test arrives under the cover of the obvious. South watch south, the scout's voice ricochets along the circle, landing soft where it must. The trooper sees it now. The west is a conversation starter. The south is the point. He adjusts his body the width of a rib, gives his eyes one slow blink, and when he opens them, the rider is exactly where the blink had predicted. The shot is less a shot than an agreement completed. The southern thread frays. The western dust, deprived of meaning, dissolves into afternoon. 8th incident, close work. A pair on foot, rare, risky, skulk low along a rock lip using heat shimmer the way a stage uses a curtain. They are good. For a moment, even the land seems to consider admitting them. The trooper with the letter thinks of the fold, how paper keeps its shape by remembering pressure, and he leans his cheek to the stock with that same memory. He cannot quite see their faces. He can see their intent. Left, 2, he whispers, and the 2 who need the whisper receive it. 3 rifles, 1 breath, and the rock lip learns a new punctuation. The pair withdraw alive, perhaps slower now, dignity intact because skill deserves respect even when it fails. The trooper tastes copper, realizes he has bitten his lip, and decides to keep the blood for later. 9th incident, the one that tests morale rather than line. A rumor moves through the skirmishers that a detachment elsewhere has been hit hard. It is unverified, it is plausible, and it carries that peculiar electricity that only bad news wears. The sergeant kills it with a sentence cut from wire. You will not know that here, and it will not change this. The rumor sulks, then dies. The line spared the extra weight, remembers its job be a circle that refuses conversion into a story someone else would rather tell. Late afternoon, the light loses its cruelty and gains a kind of stern mercy. The 10th incident arrives not as attack, but as decision. On the far rise, forms thicken, consult thin, gesture their frustration to the horizon. The probes slow. The dust chooses away rather than toward. The basin's grammar tilts subject and object swapping places. The spring stops being something to reach and becomes something to flee wisely. The 10th do not cheer the desert taxes celebration. They breathe the long breath a man owes himself when a theory has survived a day. Water rationed becomes a hymn sung softly. Horses are watered by sequence, the older mares first, because they carry more math in their bones. And yet, even as the incidents curl back into distance, the day insists on one more hinge, a coda that belongs to folklore. At edgelight, that blue minute which makes everything honest, a rider without a shadow approaches, just to the line where voices could be words if they wanted. He lifts a hand, not surrender, not threat. The old gesture that means, I have seen enough. He waits long enough to confirm that the circle, even at dusk, is still a circle. Then he turns slow as a decision and rides toward a darkness that is not empty, only uncounted. The sentries watch him go, as if watching a phrase finish itself. No one speaks. The spring makes its small sound. Night settles thin, at first then complete. The incidents recount themselves in low voices and short sentences, and the occasional laugh that ends in a sigh. The farrier finishes the shoe by lantern tapping each nail, as if closing a chapter. The corporal who moved too soon volunteers for the last watch, a penance without theater, and is given it because men prefer penalties they can pay directly. The trooper unfolds the letter, adds a sentence that does not explain, folds it again. He drinks last on purpose and hears in the water's answer something he cannot quite name. Not forgiveness, not even recognition. Only this: the day accepted the men who agreed to be exact. We leave the basin under stars, the circle intact. The spring guarded by men who will sleep in segments and dream in fragments. The incidents have not ended the campaign. They have bent it. Tomorrow will ask for miles. Tonight asks only for names to be said quietly and for canteens to be closed with care. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a leader counts his people by listening to their breathing. Somewhere within the circle, another leader counts by reading the level of a spring against stone. Between them, the desert counts everything and remembers. The paperwork arrives after the dust, always after. It comes in from the edges of the theater, folded, docketed, signed in hands that try to be immune to heat, and it begins to translate the day into sentences that can sit on shelves. Rattlesnake Springs, New Mexico Territory, August 6th, 1880. Denial of water, affected enemy movement, constrained friendly losses, light ammunition expended within estimates, horses watered under control. A string of facts, careful unadorned, that make no attempt to speak about breath or doubt or the sound a canteen cap makes when it is opened like a prayer. And yet, in the short nouns and the long dates, a hard truth the circle worked. The officer's memoranda stitch the tactical to the operational. Deny water force distance, make speed trade itself for survival. Columns on the march will always call thirst by other names. Fatigue, dispersion, reduction in initiative. But the arithmetic is simple enough. The spring held for a day purchased hours that the map converted into miles, and miles into choices. Recommendations follow detach suitable forces to watch alternate seeps, coordinate with adjacent commands for converging pressure, conserve mounts, pay in patience where bullets would be waste. The language is dry because dryness survives filings and inquiries and the long winter of memory. The 10th Cavalry is named in unit, not in person. Strength, disposition, behavior. Steady. Numbers, not faces, as if the desert had decided to count the regiment the way it counts Ocotillo, by line, not by leaf. Another layer of fact, more granular, more human, peeks in through supply. Ledgers show grain distributed in smaller handfuls in the days before the battle. Shows shoeing nails low and then resupplied. Show carbine cartridges issued with a caution that seems to later readers almost stingy. And yet, in theater was love by another name. The farrier's work is noted. The saddler's. A list of horses slated for walking water only. There is a receipt for canvas shade that pretends to be mercy, and there are names beside it, not because the canvas will remember them, but because the quartermaster must. The quartermaster, poor man, becomes a reluctant poet in numbers each column, a pain he cannot directly express, each total a stanza that says, these men were exact, and therefore alive. Widen and the campaign flows forward. Scouts trace Victorio's band bending away from the spring south, then east, then south again, reading the country the way a hand reads old scars. Reports up the chain describe prudence under constraint, a phrase that could be stitched to either flag and still be true. In the months that follow, the border hardens to a blade. The chase becomes a net of small knots rather than one thick rope. October of that same year, far to the south, near Tres Castillos in Chihuahua, a closing chapter will be written in gunfire not heard at Rattlesnake Springs. On paper, causation is cautious. No single day decides a life, and yet, the map of last choices is always drawn by earlier denials. Water held here, hours gained there, a leader forced at last into a geometry he did not choose. Fact does not do triumph, it does sequence. Rattlesnake Springs is a sequence the campaign could not forget. Now the folklore comes up like water through stone. Quiet, insistent. Cups begin to appear by the spring. Not many 1-2 enamel chipped tin dented a porcelain teacup whose handle has been mended with wire. No note, no claim. The ranch hands say the cups are for the morning. Travelers say the cups are for whoever needs to be first. An Apache woman speaking to a works progress writer in a kitchen that smells of beans and ash says the cups are for those who did not drink when they wanted to. She does not say soldiers. She does not say enemies. She says those who held their wish until it was time. The phrase enters the spring the way shade enters noon, barely. Then completely. Songs shift. In border towns, men sing corridos that mention a fuente vigilada, a watched fountain, where names are not spoken but are not allowed to be lost. In black churches 2 states away, a deacon folds a new verse into an old spiritual. If you hold the water, Lord, I'll hold the line, and the congregation answers in a hum that sounds like a canteen being passed hand to hand without scrape or clatter. Newspapers in the 1890s will miss these songs. Newspapers are made of distance. But the songs do not need newspapers. They have throats. They have porches. They have springs. Fact returns insistently properly, with affidavit and deposition. A scout deposes that the enemy attempted approach under smoke, that effective fires were delivered, that the water's edge was not compromised. An officer attests that his men withheld pursuit per standing instruction, that discipline overrode impulse, that the spring remained unspoiled, a phrase so almost poetic he will later scratch it out and write secure. Another report from a neighboring command notes that families, horses, children were observed at distance, that movement patterns shifted from attack to evasion, that the calculus had changed. In margins, one hand writes, "We must be careful what victory means here." The hand is not sure why it wrote the sentence. It is sure it must not erase it. Folklore has no margins. Everything is center. A grandmother teaches a child to pour a little water back after drinking. For the keepers, she says. For the morning. The child asks who the keepers are. You'll know when you need them, she answers. Then laughs, because children deserve light more often than gravity. A cowboy claims he saw a patrol at dusk where there was none silhouettes that did not move until he tried to look straight at them. He tells the story not to scare, but to advise. Don't test the water's patience, he says, and the phrase clings to the rim of cups for years. The black press, when it can, begins to reach backward with deliberate hands. Decades later, a small column in a northern city prints a list of campaigns where the 10th and 9th stood exactly long enough for someone else to move. The list is not complete. Lists never are. But the intent is a kind of reclamation to put names back into sentences that had been emptied of them. A veteran gray at the edges, voice clean, sits for a brief interview and refuses grandness. We did what was asked, he says, and we were thirsty. The line lands like a gavel, not because it is loud, because it is true. The interviewer writes modest in his notes. He does not write exact. Meanwhile, museum labels inch toward honesty. A county display that once called the day a skirmish relabels it a decision at water, not to exaggerate, but to name the thing more precisely. A docent begins to pause during his talk longer than he used to, letting visitors hear the quiet that soldiers chose to keep. He does not tell the ghost story. He does not need to. Silence correctly kept implies it. And still the ledgers do their work. Payrolls are settled, forage accounted. A horse that threw a shoe and recovered is listed with a tick that means serviceable. The quartermaster signs his name so many times, his wrist learns to do it without him. The effect is cumulative, the day holds, because 100 small exactitudes chose not to wobble. This too becomes folklore, not in words, but in habits. A ranch crew near the spring will straighten bridles on a rail, even when there is no reason. A family will teach its children to fold blankets tight. A trail boss will dock a man not for being slow, but for being sloppy. The spring remembers sloppiness, he says. He does not say why he believes it. He does not have to. There is a darker seam, there always is. Stories from the Apache side hold sorrow that fact cannot wash away. A woman recounts a child's cracked lips, the way adults lied kindly about distance, the way a leader's intelligence is sometimes only the art of choosing which grief will be suffered first. She does not absolve. She does not condemn. She names. The spring in her telling is neither friend nor foe, only judge. The judgment is not about justice, it is about capacity. Can you reach me? Can you leave me whole? Can you remember me after you drink? Her voice is steady. Steady voices become archives when paper fails. Some nights, years on the rider, claims he hears rains creak where no horse should be. He halts, tips his hat, and waits. Nothing happens, except that the waiting becomes the point. He rides on softer than he arrived. He will not make a show of the story. Shows spend what they should invest. He will keep the waiting and teach it to his son. Fact again tightens its pages. Policy memos cite Rattlesnake Springs as precedent for water denial strategy in open country, no grand doctrine. Just a note in the margin of operations. Treat springs as objectives. Hold with discipline. Refuse pursuit that sacrifices control. The sentence looks small in a manual. Its edge is large in a world where maps have more sand than ink. Training circulars encourage junior officers to practice command by sign when heat destroys voice. A bullet point reads, "Use hands, not lungs." Somewhere, a veteran of the 10th smiles without smiling. Hands saved him more than once. And then, the braided layer fact and folklore in parallel braids again. In a black newspaper's Sunday edition, a short remembrance runs under a headline. No one will clip for a scrapbook they held the water. It names the regiment names. The place does not name the men, not because the writer does not want to, but because he cannot find the names in the papers. The clerk will allow him to see. He compensates with cadence, a paragraph that says, held, 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 until the word changes from verb to virtue. Across town the same morning, a congregation sings a hymn about wells in dry places. No one there has been to Rattlesnake Springs. Everyone there has. At the spring itself, the cup custom persists. Sometimes the cups vanish, a winter storm takes them. A traveler pockets them, and new cups appear as if the ground itself grew handles. A boy tries to throw stones into the water and is stopped by a stranger's gentle hand. Not here, the stranger says. The boy asks why. The stranger glances at the circle of mesquite shadows and answers, because someone once chose not to waste a shot. The boy will not understand for years. Understanding is also a kind of water. It takes the shape of whatever holds it. The archive of breath gathers one more entry. An elderly man, maybe the trooper, maybe a friend, sits by a window and writes a line he will not mail. We were exact so that the water could be generous. He underlines exact. He does not underline generous. He has learned which word needs help. The page folds, the day dims, the spring far away continues. The only job springs have to say yes to the living, and to remind the living what the cost of yes can be. We close this part with both ledgers open. On the left, dates, units, distances, a map of seeps, with pencil circles nearly vanished from too many hands, turning the sheet. On the right, cups, songs, a grandmother's instruction, a child's delayed comprehension, a writer's pause at dusk. Between them, an understanding some victories are measured in headlines, others in habits. Some names are saved in bronze, others in the way a community agrees to pour a little back before it drinks. Fact keeps the bones of the day. Folklore keeps its breath. And if you stand there even now and listen long enough, the two ledgers begin to read each other. You will hear the quartermaster's numbers soften into gratitude. You will hear the song borrow a date. You will hear the spring count not men, but moments of restraint. Rattlesnake Springs remains a syllable the land repeats, at a pace that ignores newspapers and persuades memory. Hold the water, hold the line. Hold the silence long enough for the place to speak, then drink and leave a cup. Paper arrives last. Always last. After the hooves have cooled, after the lantern soot has settled on the tin cups, after the desert has edited the noise into a single patient note of water. Then the record begins, crisp, rectangular, unsentimental. Rattlesnake Springs, New Mexico Territory. August 6, 1880. Objective, deny water. Method, perimeter control. Result, enemy movement constrained. Friendly losses light. Ammunition expended within estimates. Mounts watered under discipline. A string of nouns and verbs precise. Dehydrated. Serviceable that can ride a shelf for 100 years without panting. The circle in the language of adjutants worked. Orders written the week after Titan caused a consequence. Deny water, increase distance, reduce initiative, impose route choice. The arrows feel inevitable, printed certainty. Yet everyone who stood on that green rim knows the arrows were made of breath. Hands signaled, not lungs. Men chose silence over spectacle. A quartermaster not given to poetry itemizes the marrow of the day grain issued by fistfuls. Shoeing nails down to 2 kegs replenished. Carbine cartridges opened and counted 3 companies reported with fewer than a dozen misfires. There is a line about canvas shade provided where practicable and another about horses to be watered by sequence oldest first. Paper in its shy way admits tenderness, then hides it in clerical gray. The campaign map tilts forward. Scouts cut sign east, then south, single-file impressions that spread into wind-polished guesses, band moving to alternate sources. Telegraphs blink through the heat pressure to be maintained. Economy paramount. Detachments to observe Bitter Lake, Dog Canyon. Names that taste like stone. In operational prose, Rattlesnake Springs becomes a verb to rattlesnake to hold a dot until an opponent's options evaporate into distance. The grammar is inelegant, effective, colonial. By autumn, far south, Chihuahua, a last chapter prints itself loud at Tres Castillos. Paper is careful about causation. The desert is not. It whispers sequence as if it were scripture water held here. Hours bought there. Routes narrowed, futures chosen, whether anyone wanted them or not. Now the other ledger opens, the one the wind keeps. Cups appear at the spring, then disappear, then appear again. Enamel-chipped tin dented a porcelain teacup that looks ashamed of its own prettiness, all placed on the rock lip as if set for a quiet guest. No sign, no boast. A ranch hand tells a visitor decades later, the cups are for the morning. The visitor asks, whose morning? The hand looks at the water and says, whoever kept us from being thirsty before their turn. He does not say soldiers. He does not say Apache. He refuses to make the spring pick sides after the fact. Folklore is merciful in ways headlines cannot afford. Songs adjust their verses. A border corrido folds in a half-rhyme about a fuente velada watched veiled, both where names are remembered without being spoken. In a black church 2 states away, a deacon adds a line to an old hymn. If I hold the water, Lord, you help me hold the line. And the congregation answers with a murmur that sounds like tin caps tapped shut with reverence. No reporter writes it down. That's all right, the melody knows the road to grandchildren. Fact insists, as it should, on affidavits. A scout testifies to smoke laid low and shapes sliding in spirals, the phrase repeated from an officer's earlier note now fossilized by oath. An after-action from a neighboring command admits what pride would prefer to blur. Approach to the spring thwarted by steady fire and disciplined refusal of pursuit. Refusal. The word carries more courage than trumpet calls when water is the prize. A colonel scratches out a sliver of sentiment spring remained unspoiled and replaces it with secure, then leaves the ghost of the first word showing through. Paper betrays feeling the way a man's hat brim betrays his doubt in the angle, not the speech. Meanwhile, kitchen tables do their archiving. An Apache mother tells a works progress woman in a room that smells of ash and beans. We walked dry, and we lied kindly about distance, because children deserve a tomorrow, even if it hurts today. She does not absolve. She does not condemn. She names. The spring in her telling is a judge that only asks 3 questions. Can you reach me? Can you leave me whole? Will you remember me after you drink? Later, her granddaughter will pour a finger of water back onto the ground after every fill, not superstition, not bargain, etiquette. Places that have listened deserve to be thanked. The Army's manuals learn slowly, then all at once. A training circular borrows Rattlesnake's grammar without citing it. Treat water sources as decisive terrain. Command by sign when heat defeats voice. Conserve cartridges for denial, not display. Bullet points, ironically, for men who avoided theatrics. Another memo, more daring than most, sketches an ethic in the margin. Precision is kindness in dry country. No one signs that line. Perhaps no one dared. Perhaps everyone did. And yet the other ethic, the one written in sorrow, refuses to dry up. A woman remembers a child's cracked lips, the soft lies adults tell about just over the rise. The way a leader's genius can be the art of choosing which grief to suffer first. Her story honors Victorio's intelligence without turning it into myth. He could read stone, but stone could read him back. She will not say that a spring is neutral, nothing alive is neutral. She will say it is honest. Honesty is hard on everyone equally. Back on paper, the quartermaster completes his reluctant poem. Payroll settled, forage balanced. A list of mounts marked to be walked to water, only kindness written in the grammar of constraint. He signs his name so many times his hand forgets to be a hand and becomes a rubber stamp with veins. In the sums, an accidental lyric, exactness prevents mourning. He would be embarrassed to hear it read aloud. The desert would nod. Cups continue. A boy tries to skip stones and is stopped by a stranger's gentle palm on his wrist. Not here, the stranger says a law of the place stated without the ugliness of law's voice. The boy asks why. Because someone once chose not to waste a shot. The boy nods as if he understands. He does not. Understanding, like water, takes the shape of time. A black newspaper years later. Sunday edition runs a quiet column under a headline that refuses heroics. They held the water. The writer cannot find most of the names. Clerks misfiled them, fonts shrank them. So he repeats the verb until the verb becomes a virtue. Held, held, held. Across town the same morning a choir swells on the word hold, and for 2 measures the room sounds like a circle around a spring. The connection is invisible and perfect. Museum labels blush into accuracy. Skirmish at Rattlesnake Springs becomes decision at water. A docent learns to pause in front of a shallow glassed-in diorama, a plastic sheen pretending to be a seep, and let visitors listen to a recorded trickle for 3 full breaths. Some fidget. Some close their eyes. One veteran, white hair like sunlit chaff, weeps without wanting to and says only, "They didn't shout." The docent says, "No." The veteran adds, "They didn't need to." The docent wisely says nothing else. Silence performs the service. From the Apache side, a song refuses extinction. Not a ballad, a spine of notes, almost spoken. "We do not drink first when we are hunted." One line says. "We do not drink last when we are elders," another corrects. The 2 lines do not contradict. They braid. The song holds no malice. Only arithmetic, the arithmetic that makes a people continue. Somewhere across a century, a cavalry descendant will hear the melody by accident at a festival and feel a heat he cannot blame on summer. He will not know why his throat wants a canteen. Fact returning again because it must pins the sequence down so that the future will not kick it loose. Enemy retired in good order. Pressure to be maintained. Detachments to observe secondary sources. Friendly command to conserve mounts. Dull. Correct. Blessed. Commanders are paid to write blessed without writing the word. In a footnote almost invisible, a hand adds colored troops comported themselves with steadiness. The hand believes it is complimenting. The desert knows it is correcting an omission that should have been impossible. The corporal who stepped early writes his own small report unsigned, folded into a Bible that will outlive him. My mistake cost breath. I did not deserve to spend. They let me pay with the last watch. I kept it well. In the margin of the same page, Lord, make me exact. He underlines exact. No pastor reads it from the pulpit. The prayer is not for public voice. It is for the night. There is, as there often is, a story about a rider at dusk with no shadow. It comes late, spoken only when the coffee has gone cool. He approaches the line, lifts his hand, not parley, not threat, the gesture older than language that means I have seen enough. He waits until the circle proves it can keep being a circle, even after the heat's authority has faded. Then he turns slow as a closing eye and rides into the fold where dark begins its patient inventory. The sentries do not tell the officer. Some truths are so accurate they cannot be entered into form. Policy ripples outward. Camp commands emphasize command by sign, for summer hands, not throats. Posture, not panic. Instructors chalk rattlesnake on blackboards as a mnemonic for refuse pursuit. Anchor on water. Temper fire. The rest of the letters filled by men who like acronyms too much. The point underneath the cleverness holds spectacle forfeits control. Control is the mission. A sergeant, the same who rationed canteen caps like hymns, tells a new private, do the careful thing first. The brave thing will still be there if you need it. Wisdom that veterans pay for is sometimes free to hear, never free to carry. And then, the 2 ledgers touch. A museum oral history room records an old voice saying, "We were exact so the water could be generous." The sentence appears years later on a poster above a case of artifacts, a McKeever cartridge box, a slouch hat, cord the color of dry grass, a cup with its enamel nicked to the metal. People read the sentence and think it is pretty. The spring reads the sentence and thinks it is accurate. We close the books not to end, to rest. On the desk, the adjutant's pages neat, cool, indispensable. Beside them, a clutch of notes written in kitchens and on hymn margins, warm, unfinished, indestructible. Through the open window, somewhere upstream of memory, a small water sound keeps doing the only job it knows. Fact gives the day its bones. Folklore returns the breath. Together they make a body that can stand. Stand here, if you can, and listen. You will hear the quartermaster counting his prayer. You will hear the song borrowing a date because it has earned one. You will hear a child pour a little back for the morning, for the keepers, for anyone who chose precision over pride. Rattlesnake Springs remains not a myth, not a monument, a syllable the basin repeats, until someone answers with the right name spoken gently, and the circle for one more day holds. High noon dissolves into a whiter cruelty. Then little by little the edge comes off the light. Shadows return as faint handwriting along the rocks. The basin exhales once, then again. Somewhere beyond the far ridge, counsel changes tone. Somewhere within the circle, orders compress to gestures. The spring keeps its small, patient music, and the idea tested all day until it became a habit. Hardens into a fact you can lay on the ground, like a rule hold the water. The enemy must hold their breath instead. The inflection point is not thunder. It is a draft in a closed room. A push that had cadence loses it. Probes that felt like questions begin to sound like apologies. On the horizon, dust stands up as if to speak, then sits down again. From the south, a last feint lifts careful, plausible, almost elegant, and the 10th answer, not with theater, but with grammar. 2 notes. A pause. Then one more, enough to write no across the seam without scratching the page. The line bends microscopically and becomes a circle again. The spring, untouched, glints as if it had been holding its breath, too. Victorio lean mind, quick sums reads it. Water has become a broker that favors the patient. Speed, his oldest ally, now bills by the hour, and the rate has gone strange. He can spend lives for a drink or spend distance for another hour. He chooses the choice that lets a people wake up tomorrow. He signals something between not here and not now, and the air takes the signal as easily as a horse takes shade. He is not beaten. He is edited by a country that has learned to read him back. The desert keeps its impartiality cruel to the slow, kind to the exact, honest with everyone. Inside the circle, the 10th feel the change arrive, like rain that never touches skin. The trooper with the letter does not grin. Grins waste moisture. He allows one breath to be longer than the one before. The corporal who moved too soon at noon and paid with 6 immortal heartbeats finds his hands steady again. Forgiveness out here wears the uniform of exactness. The farrier who pocketed a nail like a tiny piece of tomorrow touches his horse's neck and hears the animal's breath shift keys. The sergeant walks the line with that quiet particular to men who have learned how not to disturb a victory while it is still thinking about arriving. Easy, he says, and the word lands only where it needs to. Climax is a hush that begins to make sense. No surge, no drum, not even the polite triumph of a bugle, just the slow agreement of distances to become farther. The last hard attempt breaks against the part of the line that was already a wall strong because it didn't need to prove it was. A rider crests a low shelf, judges wrong by the width of a prayer, and vanishes into the basin's longer arithmetic. Another tests the left with a promise he cannot afford to keep. On the right, a hat on a stick makes one final joke. No one laughs. Jokes spend water. Then blue begins at the edges. Heat's knife recedes to its sheath. Horses who have no patience for romance accept the truth first. They stop bracing against thirst as if it were a bully and begin to calculate the next sip. Sequence, the officer murmurs, and the word means ethics as much as logistics. Old mares first. Then the geldings that carried more than men knew. Then the colts who pretended not to be afraid. The spring does not favor men do. A decision is written into policy and posture, both no pursuit. Not because bravery has run out, because the mission has not. You can chase a wounded day and lose the water by twilight, or you can keep the dot that buys tomorrow. The officer's hand cuts a quiet no in the air. The eager read it and nod. The weary read it and bless him. Command by sign heat has eaten voice so completely that an order yelled would feel like an insult to the afternoon's patience. The circle loosens without opening. Men stretch into their bones. Shoulders drop to the height honesty allows. Canteens pass as if they were news from home. The trooper with the letter waits on purpose, then lifts the cap and lets the metal tap the thread of the mouth like a tiny bell. He does not drink immediately. He breathes the cool that rises and lets the first swallow be a small truth. Not a rescue. He thinks without words we were exact so the water could be generous. He will not write it that way tonight. The line will come years later when he has earned the right to admit what he already knows. Across the basin, a final silhouette pauses too far to be shot close enough to be understood. A hand lifts. Not parley, not challenge. The old grammar that means I am done with the questions this place asks. The circle neither beckons nor bristles. It simply remains a circle. The silhouette becomes less, and then it becomes evening. The Warm Springs people, children, Pony's old ones will take their miles carefully now. Thirst is a tyrant you negotiate with. You never beat it outright. Victorio chooses his negotiations with the precision a good leader owes love. In the 10th's small city of discipline, work replaces waiting. The farrier returns to the hoof he had to drop when noon tried to take his head. Tap, 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 each nail a tiny amen. The saddler tests a stitch with his teeth and reties it with a tenderness he would never waste on language. A private, cheek salt stiff, unbuckles a McKeever box and counts cartridges as if counting beads. He knows each number by feel now. A corporal rolls a coil of rope until it remembers it was born straight. The sergeant notes who drank too fast and says nothing. Later he will fix the hunger with a story and a pace rather than with shame. Command is a long conversation with fatigue. The spring keeps being the spring. Its sound is not louder. It is more legible. Men hear vowels in it where earlier there had only been a hiss. The basin invents a breeze and pretends it always meant to. A bird practical unawed inspects the water's edge for insects that believed they were immortal until dusk. The desert will be generous tonight, if you pay properly. Inflection is also administrative. The officer writes a note brief. Square unsurprised. Objective achieved. Movement constrained. Friendly losses light. No pursuit. Mounts watered by sequence. Recommend detachments to observe alternate sources. He pauses on unspoiled. He wants to write it and doesn't. He writes secure. He leaves the ghost of the other word behind it, faint as a regret he doesn't intend to confess. He signs with a hand that shakes only after it is done being needed. A rumor approaches. Good rumors are rare. This one is modest. A neighboring detachment has seen dust choosing away. The sergeant kills it softly. We'll know when we need to because joy can make men sloppy faster than fear can. Joy spends water too. The corporal who took the last watch yesterday asks for the last watch again. The sergeant nods. Penance here is not a ceremony, it's a shift. And almost invisibly, the day arranges its lesson, then gives it away. The 10th did not become heroes today, they became correct. Correctness under this kind of light is a love letter to tomorrow. The campaign will turn south, then inward. Reports will stack. Months will do their grinding work. Tres Castillos will thunder far away. History will place the exclamation mark there. But punctuation depends on the sentence that earned it. Rattlesnake Springs is a comma that prevented a period. A hinge that did not creak. A breath held long enough to make another breath possible. Night builds itself out of cool. Lanterns lift small cones that choose maps and spare faces. The line becomes a necklace of low talk and the occasional tin click. Someone hums off-key, true-hearted, the chorus of a church song that does not know this county and loves it anyway. A scout cleans dust out of his teeth with a twig and spits wisdom. We didn't chase because we wanted tomorrow to show up. No one writes it down. That's fine. Some lines are meant to live in throats. The trooper unfolds his letter. The crease is a geography of the day. He adds 7 words. We held the water. I will write later. He thinks of the cups that will appear here years from now without anyone needing to agree about why. He thinks of names that never saw newsprint and of a spring that pronounces them perfectly when no one is around. He thinks of a phrase he will not say aloud because saying it would spend it. The forgotten remembered themselves. He folds the paper along the same faithful seam and tucks it where the body knows to keep what matters. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Victorio counts in silence. He inventories the living by listening to sleep. He's not beaten. He is being asked to choose between 2 kinds of strength, both expensive. Tomorrow he will choose again, because that is what leaders do when maps turn mean. The desert offers no counsel beyond honesty. Honesty is enough and never kind. Midnight, cool enough to forgive. The corporal keeps his watch like a vow he intends to renew. The farrier sleeps with one hand on the halter of a mare who dreams of grass she never met. The sergeant wakes twice to check canteen caps with a thumb. The officer, finally allowed shorter breaths, dreams of a manual that will someday admit what today taught command by sign. Refuse pursuit. Treat water as a rank of its own. The manual will almost say it. Almost is how armies protect themselves from poetry. Climax at last reveals its true name: continuance. The circle did not break. The spring did not sour. The word forgotten, the one newspapers like because it fits in headlines, learned a more complicated meaning here, not erased, not trivial, simply unrecorded unless someone keeps the record with their body. The 10th did. The basin noticed. And the night, pleased with the exactness, lowers itself like a lid. Sleep if you can. Breathe if you can't. And listen to the patient center of this place. It says without drama, without fatigue, what it said at dawn. Decide well, and I will let you live. The men decided slowly, together with hands instead of mouths. The water kept its promise, and the campaign, owing a comma to a circle that refused to become a story someone else would rather tell, moves on. Morning comes. Not here, but down the line. Rattlesnake Springs exhales its little silver breath. And the campaign, as campaigns must, moves on. Fact will say, the band bent south, then east, then south again. That months later, far away in Chihuahua, the last fierce chapter at Tres Castillos hammered a period into a sentence too long for anyone's patience. Folklore will say the spring kept watch, and men who once refused to drink first were remembered by water that refuses to forget. Both are true, and both are incomplete, unless we stand a little longer and let the place finish its testimony. The 10th Cavalry returned to miles columns that look like decisions from a distance and like tired animals from up close. Reports stack square dry until even the clerk needs a drink he cannot name. Promotions come late, if at all. Citations arrive in a language that cannot carry dust. A few names nick the edge of newsprint. More do not. The trooper with the letter posts, nothing not yet. He keeps the fold the way a spring keeps the rim of stone pressure, remembered, shape preserved. In a barracks 2 winters later, he will read the line-colored troops comported themselves with steadiness and almost laugh. Not because it is wrong, but because it is smaller than a canteen cap's click. He will put the clipping into the letter as if tucking a child to sleep, careful, a little sad, grateful that even a small sentence can exist. Victorio, carved by distances no map can confess, meets the arithmetic the desert warned him about. Histories will say his intelligence was real, his reading of stone exact, his care for his people not negotiable. The end as ends do compresses him to a fact too easily recited. But between August and October, between Rattlesnake and Tres Castillos, lies the corridor where water made choices for everyone. Denial here, hunger there, a route narrowed not by orders, but by the absence of the one sound that lets a body believe in tomorrow. If there is a legacy, it is not triumph. It is sequence, the humble chain by which prudence, at a small spring, rearranged a wider fate. Years tilt. Posts are abandoned. Telegraphs sag into history's shrug. The country tarmacs its distances and names the lanes after men whose boots never learned alkali. Yet Rattlesnake Springs does not retire. It becomes a quiet grammar lesson disguised as a landscape. Ranch hands pause and pour a little back. A stranger stops a boy's throwing arm with a gentle palm and a sentence that has more mercy than law. Not here. Cups come and go, enamel-chipped tin, honest porcelain a little embarrassed to be so fine. This far from a parlor, and nobody signs them. The custom needs no signature, only witnesses. Museums adjust their labels slow. Then suddenly, skirmish cedes to decision at water. A docent learns to leave 3 full breaths of silence in front of the diorama, so the recorded trickle can do the teaching. Some fidget, some lower their eyes. One veteran white hair like dry grass in wind lets a single tear argue the case for exactness better than a graduate seminar could. They didn't shout, he says. The docent nods. They didn't need to. In a side room, a McKeever cartridge box sits beside a slouch hat cord the color of old straw and a dented cup. On the wall borrowed from an oral history, nobody can trace perfectly a line. We were exact so the water could be generous. Visitors read it as pretty. The spring reads it as true. Doctrine, the kind that knows how to wear dull clothes, absorbs the lesson in bullet points that pretend not to be poetry. Treat water as decisive terrain. Command by sign when heat eats voice. Refuse pursuit that spends control. Young officers will study these lines under fluorescent lights, far from mesquite, and some will get it not as a tactic, as an ethic. Precision is kindness in dry country. Kindness is not softness, it is the refusal to be wasteful with life. The 10th taught that without lecture. The Basin wrote the certificate. The black press. When it can find space between catastrophe and celebration prints. Quiet columns with headlines that never go viral, they held the water. The writer cannot retrieve all the names. Clerks misplaced them in the years when ink had its own prejudices. He repeats the verb held, 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 until it becomes a virtue anyone can understand. In a choir 2 states away, a deacon adds a line to an old hymn. If we hold the water, Lord, help us hold the line, and the room answers with a low, unanimous yes. That sounds like tin caps tapped shut with care. No reporter is present. The echo is enough. From the Apache side, the inheritance is heavier, a ledger written in thirst and loss, with pages numbered by miles. A grandmother tells a work's progress woman, we walked dry and lied kindly about distance, because children deserve a tomorrow even if it hurts today. Her voice is not an indictment, it is a measurement. She teaches her granddaughter to pour a finger back into the ground after every drink for the morning, for the keepers, for whoever chose not to waste a shot. The girl does not understand yet. Understanding requires seasons. So does respect. Decades pass. A descendant of the 10th invited to speak at a county gathering, where the air smells of folding chairs and lemonade says less than they asked him to. He holds up a photograph where faces are mostly hats and shadows and says, they were exact. The room wants adjectives. He gives them a noun. Later, under a cottonwood that pretends the desert has a softer cousin, a child asks him what exact means. He kneels, opens a canteen, carefully taps the cap once and pours a whisper back to the roots. It means this, he says. The child watches as if being handed a secret he will not be allowed to spend all at once. Policy drifts, memory doesn't. The spring keeps being itself indifferent to ceremony, loyal to restraint. On certain evenings at the blue minute that makes honesty easier, a rider will pause just within the distance where gestures can be read. He will lift his hand, not parley, not threat the old grammar that means I have seen enough. He will wait one breath. 2. As if confirming that the circle once made has not entirely unlearned how to exist. Then he will turn toward darkness that is not empty, only uncounted. Sentries modern casual will feel the hair rise on their forearms without calling it superstition. The basin will consider them attentive and let the night proceed. The trooper with the letter grows older in rooms that do not smell like gypsum. He unfolds the paper less often, now the crease has become a map of a day he can step into without objecting to his knees. He will write one last sentence he never mails. We held the water. We were thirsty. We were seen by the spring. He underlines nothing. He has learned which truths underline themselves. So what endures? A method: hold the water, hold the line. Refuse to spend courage on spectacle when precision will do. A courtesy: pour a little back for the morning, for those who kept watch before it was their turn to drink. A correction: the word forgotten lies not because men are remembered in headlines, but because places remember with a fidelity paper cannot manage. And a charge to those who tell it next: do not barter the quiet away for applause. Let the hush do its work. Let the canteen cap click be the loudest thing for a while. We return as promised to the first image, a glint on stone. A breath measured into a trigger. A spring that sounded like a small, patient sentence. Welcome to Rattlesnake Springs again, but now with the grammar learned. If you ever find yourself there, bring a cup chipped honest and manners. Stand still. Listen until the water stops being background and becomes the subject. Say their name, the 10th Cavalry, not as a number, as a rhythm. Then pour a finger back, for the keepers, for the morning, for anyone asked by a hard country to be exact. And before you go, because stories live longest when they are shared by the living, tell us where you're listening from, and the exact minute you felt the place arrive in your chest. Was it the tap of a canteen cap? The old mare watered first? The rider who lifted his hand at blue light? The sentence, we were exact so the water could be generous? Leave it in the ledger below, not for applause, for sequence. For those who will come thirsty to the comments and find in your words a little water that has already been blessed.